I pulled into the garage after a 3-day work trip, expecting unopened mail. Daniel's shoes by the kitchen door. And dinner. Before I could lift my suitcase, my phone buzzed with a smart lock alert. Your next guest arrives in 38 minutes. I checked the address because I had never listed our Bellevue home for rent. Then whispered, "This has to be a mistake," while the countdown moved. Only my husband, Daniel Brooks, and I had access to that lock. A silver SUV stopped at the curb before I could call him, and a couple stepped out with suitcases, grocery bags, and the confidence of people who belonged there. The woman checked the number, smiled, and said, "Hi, we're early," but Daniel said the code would work at 4. I tightened my grip on the phone and answered. Daniel is my husband, and this is my home, watching her expression change. The man opened their reservation page and showed me photographs of my living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and the blue front door I had painted. The listing described our house as one of Bellevue's highest-rated weekend stays, with dozens of 5-star reviews beneath Daniel's name. Pause 4S. I wanted to believe someone had copied our photographs until the woman opened Daniel's welcome message and read the 6-digit entry code aloud. Every number matched the temporary code active in my lock app, leaving no room for the error I had imagined. I apologized, asked them to wait outside, and opened the booking platform's support chat while they stood beside their luggage. The representative verified my street, zip code, and the maple tree beside the driveway, then confirmed another reservation was beginning that afternoon. "How long has this listing been active?" I asked, and after a pause, she answered, "Several months, with more stays scheduled." I looked at the strangers waiting to enter my house and understood that every detail on their screen had been arranged by someone who knew when I would be gone. Daniel had not made one careless booking. He had been opening our home whenever I left town, and strangers' new rooms I believed belonged only to us. I thanked the couple for staying patient, then walked back inside alone and kept the support chat open because I still needed one answer. The representative confirmed my address again, verified the exterior photos, and calmly explained that the listing had accepted reservations for months without interruption. I asked whether the account belonged to Daniel Brooks, and after a brief pause, she replied that she could only confirm the host name shown to guests, which matched the welcome message I had just seen. That single confirmation erased the last explanation I had been holding on to. Instead of searching Daniel's phone or calling him, I opened the smart lock app that controlled every entry to our house. The activity log showed temporary access codes appearing and disappearing almost every weekend I had traveled. Each one created a day before arrival and deleted shortly after checkout. The dates matched business conferences, client workshops, and the weekends I had spent visiting my parents, turning every trip I remembered into another piece of the same pattern. Pause 3S. The evidence was sitting in an app I had installed myself years earlier, quietly recording every change without asking whether I ever wanted to read it. I checked the home email account we used for utility bills and found invoices from a cleaning company I had never hired. Every receipt arrived on a Monday morning, always after one of my trips, and every payment had been completed before I ever returned home. I compared those invoices with the lock history and realized the cleaners had entered less than 2 hours after each temporary code expired. The timeline no longer depended on guesses because every document supported the one before it. I went back to the booking platform and asked one final question, hoping the answer would prove I had misunderstood something. "Can you tell me how many future reservations are already confirmed?" I asked. And the representative answered that several upcoming stays were still active before offering to connect me with the trust and safety team if I believed the property had been listed without my knowledge. I ended the chat without raising my voice because I already had enough evidence to understand that every time I packed a suitcase, someone else had been unpacking one inside my home. The next morning, the booking platform forwarded a reimbursement notice to the household email Daniel and I used for utilities. A recent guest had slipped on our front walkway, visited an urgent care clinic, and requested repayment for the medical bill. The message identified our house as an active short-term rental and explained that the claim would be reviewed through the insurance information attached to Daniel's host account. Until then, his secret had lived inside reservations, door codes, and cleaning invoices. But this claim was carrying it into systems he could not control. I did not contact the guest or call the insurer because I had never accepted a booking and could not explain an operation I had only discovered yesterday. Another email arrived confirming that the claim had entered review, followed by a request for proof of ownership, rental authorization, and insurance coverage. Pause 5s. The platform was no longer asking whether guests enjoyed the house. It was asking whether Daniel had the right to offer it at all. By noon, Olivia Grant, a senior claims adjuster, emailed the shared account and requested confirmation of how the property had been used during the reported stay. Her message remained routine. If you are not the correct contact, please let us know so we can update the file. She knew nothing about my marriage, the hidden bookings, or why the homeowner reading her message had never heard of the guest involved. I left the email unanswered because Olivia's questions belonged to the person who had created the risk, and Daniel had created every part of it. That afternoon, I met with Victor Hayes, a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague, carrying printed copies of the listing, lock history, cleaning invoices, and claim notice. I spread them across his conference table and kept my voice level as I explained that strangers had been renting my home whenever I traveled. Before I speak to Daniel, I need to know where my responsibility begins and where his ends, I told him. Victor reviewed each page, then looked at me and answered, "Your first step is protecting yourself from being treated as someone who approved this." Daniel came home convinced the reimbursement claim was a routine problem he could solve before it touched anything else. He dropped his keys beside the sink, glanced at the notices on the table, and said, "The guest exaggerated, and the platform only needs updated information." I watched him move through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed every locked door would open for him. When I asked why our house had been rented for months, he answered, "It started as a few weekends, and then it worked." Madison joined the call before Daniel finished explaining, and her voice carried certainty. "We can fix the listing, upload the missing documents, and keep the reservations active," she insisted, speaking as if I were a difficult partner instead of the homeowner they had excluded. Daniel added, "Nobody lost anything, and the guests were happy, while I listened to them reduce my home to ratings, occupancy, and scheduled arrivals. Their concern was not what they had done to me. It was whether the calendar would remain full. The next morning, the platform requested proof that Daniel had authority to rent the property, followed by insurance confirmation and registration details. Madison tried to answer every request separately, but every upload created another question because the names, addresses, and policy information did not line up. Daniel called support and repeated, "This is a family property, and we are correcting an administrative issue." Yet the review remained open. Pause 4s. The more they tried to make the listing legitimate, the more systems began asking who had approved it. By afternoon, the insurer requested an explanation of the property's use, while the platform asked where payouts should be held during review. Daniel stood across from me and said, "Tell them you knew about the rentals, and this can end today." I kept my voice steady and answered, "I will not confirm something that never happened." He stared at me as if my refusal were the first obstacle he had faced, while Madison went silent on the phone. In trying to save their business, they had opened the door to ownership, insurance, payment, and city compliance together. I woke before dawn to another notification from the booking platform, and this time, the subject line mentioned account restrictions instead of document requests. Daniel reached for his phone before I finished reading, but the message was already clear. Payouts connected to the listing had been placed on hold until the review was complete, and upcoming reservation payments would not be released. He whispered, "This has to be temporary," while refreshing the screen again and again. But every reload displayed the same notice. By mid-morning, another email arrived explaining that the superhost status attached to Daniel's account had been suspended while Trust and Safety completed its investigation. No one accused him of fraud, and no one mentioned our marriage. The platform simply stopped rewarding an account that could not answer its compliance questions with consistent records. Everything Daniel and Madison had built around smooth check-ins and 5-star reviews had slowed to a standstill because every system was waiting for verified information instead of promises. The insurance review continued separately, and the city sent a notice requesting information about the property's short-term rental activity after receiving routine reporting connected to the open claim. Daniel stared at the letter, then looked at me and muttered, "If they would just stop asking for one more document, this would be over." I answered quietly, "The questions keep coming because every answer points to another missing approval." Neither of us raised our voice because the paperwork already carried more weight than another argument inside the house. Madison called again before sunset, sounding less confident than she had only days earlier. She admitted that future guests were asking why reservations remained pending, and she hoped the review would end before more cancellations followed. I listened without interrupting, because nothing she described involved rumors, revenge, or public exposure. The business they had hidden inside my home was now being measured by insurance files, platform policies, and city records that operated without emotion. Every new notice arrived from a different office, yet all of them were asking the same simple question about authority that neither of them had prepared to answer. Their silence between notifications became longer than their plans had ever been. The following morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen holding a printed statement with 2 blank signature lines already marked. He placed it in front of me and spoke carefully, as though choosing softer words could change what they meant. "If you sign this, it confirms you knew we rented the house together, and the review can move forward," he said, keeping one hand on the paper instead of looking at me. I read every sentence before lifting my eyes because the document described decisions I had never made. I wasn't part of this. "Daniel," I answered, sliding the pages back across the table without touching the pen beside them. He took a slow breath and tried again. "It doesn't have to become bigger than it already is. They're only asking for confirmation." I shook my head and replied, "Confirmation isn't the same thing as truth, and I'm not putting my name on something that rewrites what happened." The room fell quiet because neither of us had another version of the facts left to offer. Later that afternoon, another update arrived from the booking platform confirming the account review would continue without my statement. Madison called Daniel while I was still in the room, and I heard enough to understand the outcome without asking questions. "They won't close the review unless every document matches," she said, followed by a long silence before adding, "My company has placed me on administrative leave until this is resolved." Pause 3S. No accusation filled the call, only the sound of consequences reaching places they had never expected. Before sunset, Daniel received a message from his employer requesting a meeting regarding outside business activities that might conflict with company policy. He stared at the screen without speaking, then quietly admitted, "Everything is happening at once." I picked up my folder for Victor Hayes and answered, "None of this started today. Today is simply when the paperwork caught up." For the first time since I returned from my trip, Daniel stopped trying to persuade me because every office reviewing his decisions had begun asking for the same thing I had already refused to provide: a signature that would turn his choices into mine. The final reservation disappeared from the booking calendar 2 days later, followed by a short notice confirming that every remaining stay had been canceled while the account review remained unresolved. Daniel kept refreshing the page as though another update might reverse what had already happened. But the calendar stayed empty from top to bottom. There were no new guests to welcome, no cleaning appointments to schedule, and no future payouts waiting to be released. The business that had quietly filled our house whenever I traveled ended without another person walking through the front door. The platform's review remained open, The insurance claim continued through its normal process, and the city had not withdrawn its request for documentation. None of those offices contacted me again because every question belonged to the account that had accepted reservations without my knowledge. Daniel lowered his phone onto the kitchen counter and murmured, "I thought we still had time to fix it." I looked at the empty booking calendar beside him and understood that time had never been the problem because every decision had already been recorded long before I came home. Victor Hayes prepared the divorce filing using the documents we had collected from the beginning, and I signed each page without needing to add another explanation. I never contacted reporters, never posted screenshots online, and never warned future guests because there were no future guests left to warn. Every important record already existed inside reservation histories, lock activity, insurance correspondence, and compliance reviews that had developed without my help. I walked out of Victor's office carrying fewer papers than I had carried in because the story no longer depended on proving anything new. Daniel packed his belongings over the weekend while the house felt quieter than it had in months. We exchanged only the words necessary to finish what was already in motion. And neither of us tried to rewrite the past one more time. As the front door closed behind him, I realized the strangers had stopped arriving before my marriage finally ended. And that order mattered because it reminded me the hidden business had collapsed under its own weight first. When I locked the door that evening, the only active access code left belonged to me. A week after the divorce papers were filed, I walked through every room with fresh eyes and changed the last remaining access code on the front door. The booking calendar was empty. The platform notifications had stopped, and the house finally sounded like a home instead of a place waiting for strangers to arrive. I carried the printed reservation pages, insurance emails, and lock records into a storage box because they had already served their purpose. Nothing inside those pages could change what had happened anymore. I stood in the living room where unfamiliar guests had once unpacked their suitcases without my knowledge, then opened every window to let the afternoon air move through the house again. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, but it belonged to me. I smiled quietly and whispered, "Welcome home," realizing those words were finally meant for me instead of someone checking in for the weekend. The house had not changed, yet it no longer felt borrowed from my own life. Daniel and Madison would have to rebuild whatever came next without the business they believed could stay hidden forever. I never searched for updates, never asked mutual friends, and never wondered whether the reviews, payouts, or reservations had returned. The documents that ended everything had been created by their own choices long before I discovered the listing. My part ended the moment I refused to sign a story that was never mine. If this story stayed with you, let it be for one simple reason. Protect your name, your home, and your peace before protecting someone else's explanation. Because records remember decisions long after excuses disappear. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, truth, and starting over, I hope you'll join me again for the next one.